Dr. Flew, gentlemen moderators, ladies and gentlemen. Since there was not just a great deal to reply to in the speech to which you just listened, I'm going to depart from my usual format of replying first to those matters to a proceeding of presenting a further affirmative argument. And I want to refer to a statement that Dr. Flew has made on a number of occasions in regard to various things about the human body as over against material things that we human beings design and make, such as automobiles, watches, and so forth. Dr. Flew has said a car is made, but an eye grows. Well, he certainly will have no conflict with me on that matter, but what Dr. Flew seems to have forgotten is that he has already admitted something that is fatal to his whole contention along this line. He has already admitted that no human being owes its ultimate origin to transformation from an ape or any other non-human being, that no human being ever came into being by being born of an ape or some other non-human being, and therefore he has admitted what Lilly said about evolution a moment ago did not touch the issue of what has been before us in this debate, top, side, edge, or bottom. Therefore, it is clear from what he himself has admitted that human beings could have originated only in some way other than by the physical law of reproduction which we know in the uniting of the human male sperm and the human female ovum. He has admitted that is not the case. He has further refused to notice, in the face of our repetition of the matter, that while we admit that the car is made, he says nothing at all about the maker of the car. While he has admitted that the maker of the car could have been here in no way other than by creation. And therefore his point about the car is made, but eyes and respiratory systems grow, simply falls by the wayside. He has already admitted, as a matter of fact, and let us look at chart number 42I and follow that with 42J. Now in chart number 42I, we have the drawn picture of a rock, so presumably on Mars. You remember the great excitement that went through the world when someone thought perhaps he had seen the single letter B on a rock. I'm sure that every atheist, every evolutionist in the world was ready to pronounce, here you see is absolute conclusive proof, so that everyone who would deny it would immediately classify himself as non-scientific, non-philosophic, and certainly on the level of an ignoramus to admit or to hold that this would not prove that there was intelligent life on Mars. But we go a little further. They had to admit they didn't find the bee. They had to admit that it no doubt was from just some physical phenomenon by chance. So I have posed a hypothesis. On chart number 42J, I have asked him, what if we found on Mars a carving in a rock? Here's a very smooth place carved in a rock, and on the rock is the head of a king carved with his coat of arms, and this message in honor of King John the 26th of Mars, who with such great valor put down the uprising of wicked men who would have murdered or enslaved us, who so generously assisted in the development of medical science, and who helped us to see that the one true God really lives. Now, Dr. Flew admitted that this would force us to conclude that we could have knowledge of intelligent life on Mars which we had never observed. I pointed out to you that this indicates that he admits the basic thrust of the argument of natural theology, that is, from empirical fact within the universe to something that we cannot see. Now, he admitted that of something within the universe. Of course, Mars is within the universe, but he has further admitted that by the combination of the concept of God with what he alleges to be evil, we may reason and therefore conclude that we have knowledge concerning the number of members and the class of things which is transcendent of the universe. Therefore, you see, he has admitted both that we may gain knowledge of something we have not observed by proper reasoning from what we have observed. Not only reasoning to knowledge of what is in this universe, but what transcends the universe. Now, friends, if ever anybody has made an admission concerning the validity of natural theology, Dr. Flew has done so. Now, I made an argument earlier. We didn't get to say a great deal about it, but I want to say more about it and introduce some new material as well. And that's to introduce the human body. Now, I am an individual empirical fact. I exist. I know there are some philosophers who deny that, but they don't really believe it. Philosophers say a lot of things they don't really believe. Philosophers sometimes say we can't really know the external world is there, but they always get off the railroad track when a train is coming. And you can't get them to jump off of a bluff down to the rocks that are 100 feet below. Now, notice carefully that the human system constitutes a single system. I am a single person. You may not think much of me, but as a matter of fact, I'm a marvelous, complex system. I'm made up of subsystems. I'm a single system made up of subsystems, and each of these subsystems have functions. Now let's look at some of these. Now, I'm no expert in these matters, but I have checked these matters with men who are. So what I'm giving you is not just something that I've just sort of tossed off here. There is the system which we know as the skin. It provides protection, support, heat regulation, absorption, excretion, stimuli reception. You can't live very long without your skin. There'd be no possibility that you could live through some long millions of years while this is evolving. And all of these systems had to be here at the same time. What good would your skin have been if you didn't have a digestive system or a respiratory system or a cardiovascular system? Or what good would your respiratory system have been without your skin, and so forth? And how on earth did whatever it was that Dr. Flew thinks was out there before there were human beings, even though he has now admitted it couldn't have come that way, how did they reproduce themselves before this very complex reproductive system that we find in the human male and female came along? Dr. Flew, I'd like to see you struggle with that just a bit and explain to us how they reproduced themselves before that came along. There is the skeletal system, provides support, protection, posture, motion, locomotion, manufacture of blood corpuscles by bone marrow, transmission of sound waves, ear bones. There is the muscular system, locomotion, movement of body parts such as stomach, intestines, heart, and so forth. You can't live without these matters. Digestive system, ingestion, digestion, absorption of food, elimination of waste. The circulatory system, transportation of foods, waste, oxygen, heat, carbon dioxide, endocrine hormones, and so forth. The respiratory system supplies oxygen, eliminates carbon dioxide and other waste. The excretory system secretes and eliminates waste materials. Nervous and sensory system receives stimuli, transmits and interprets impulses for purposes. Notice that, purposes. You can't really describe the human body without saying, well, this is for that purpose. Of correlation, movement, locomotion, behavior, secretion, and so forth. Centers of sight, hearing, taste, smell, equilibrium, and so on. The endocrine or ductless gland system, production of hormones for correlating and regulating body processes. Friends, you cannot live long without a proper regulation of insulin, a hormone which comes, of course, from our pancreas gland. If you have too much of it, you won't have any blood sugar you won't have any sugar in your blood, and you can't function. You'll even pass out and finally die. If you don't have enough of it, you can't utilize the sugar that's there. You wouldn't have time for this to have evolved over a long period of time. And you see, what I'm talking about here is not merely something that's curious or interesting or say, well, that seems to be very complex. What I'm talking about here is something that's impossible if you don't have it. Now, Dr. Flew, you need to address yourself to this argument. Now, I'm going to give again this argument. Again, it's going to be precisely stated with propositions in a valid way. Now, when an argument is presented in this way, it is the common practice of philosophers to ask two questions. One, is the argument valid? If so, then you proceed to the premises. You then ask, are the premises true? Now, if you do not care to be rational, then you say, oh, well, I just don't feel like I want to accept that. Or there's some curious things about it that are rather obnoxious to me, and so I just decide that I won't. Or I believe that I will take a leap in the dark and believe this or that. That's irrationalism, existential philosophy, or neo-orthodox theology. But it is not what my learned colleague has espoused in the past. I do not know what has happened to him in this discussion. But at any rate, here is the argument. Premise number one. If the gaseous interchanges, that is, of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the respiratory system of a human being possess such the properties or involve such things as to make clear that such interchanges were not brought into being by any part of or the totality of dead matter, then the respiratory system of the human being in which these interchanges occur must have been brought into being by the Creator who transcends the universe, that is God. That's the only one who could have done it. All of this talk about men holding to various gods, such men as Hartshorne and Brightman and Whitehead and so forth, the gods they envisioned could not have done that. It demands the God, the infinite God, infinite in all attributes. Secondly, the gaseous interchanges in the respiratory system of human being possess such properties as to make clear that such interchanges were not brought into being by any part of or the totality of dead matter. Therefore, notice this conclusion, the respiratory system of the human being must have been brought into being by the Creator who transcends the universe, that is God. Now I want you to listen carefully to the explanation of this interchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the human respiratory system. And I want on the blackboard the chart number 42A1 so the audience can see what I'm talking about as we see the air passage laid alongside the blood passage. Now this interchange does not occur like if you have a water hose here and the water is pouring out of it and you hook another hose onto the end of it, so it is simply pouring out of one hose into another. But it's rather like putting two hoses alongside, and the water in one hose is simply going through the wall of this hole into the other. Now, my friends, you cannot live longer than 5 minutes without this occurring. I'm begging, I'm pleading for Dr. Flew to give some attention to the fact that I'm claiming that it's impossible. It is impossible for that to have evolved because of the time factor simply will not allow it. Now, notice this explanation. The tension of oxygen is lower in the venous blood than in the alveolar air, but the venous blood has a higher tension of the carbon dioxide. The pulmonary capillaries in the air in the alveoli are separated by membranes which are so delicate as to be freely permeable to these gases, that is, oxygen and carbon dioxide. The differences in the relevant pressures are favorable to a rapid inward diffusion of oxygen from alveolar air to blood and an outward diffusion of carbon dioxide, that is, from blood to the alveolar air. Now notice you've got to get oxygen into your blood, and it's got to go all over your body or you'll die. And you've got to get the carbon dioxide out of your blood and out of the air as you breathe or you'll die. And that has to occur within at least, at most, a 5-minute period. I'm therefore declaring it's impossible otherwise. Now Dr. Flew admits that if it can be shown that purposive action and thus design has occurred, that some intelligent being or designer exists. Now he's admitted that. Now I'm saying here is something that shows purposive action that could not have come by sheer accident or by sheer chance. He would have you to believe that this matter that has to occur within this 5-minute period occurred like something like a whirlwind blowing through a junkyard and blowing a watch out on the other side of it. It simply will not work. Note further, there is purposive action in subhuman levels of life. There is purposive action in human levels of life. And there is purposive action in life transcendent of human life. Let's look at that chart for just a moment. I want you to see, just to look at it. Notice, as you'll point out with the pointer, here is air coming along in the air passage. The oxygen being of greater pressure in the air passage than the oxygen particles in the blood, passes through the capillary wall into the blood and then is carried to the parts of the body. On the other hand, the carbon dioxide has greater pressure than the carbon dioxide in the air passage. Therefore, it passes through the air. Now, this is a well-known fact. It's involved in the law of physics and the law of gases, and Dr. Flew has before him something that he simply cannot handle. Now, something further along this line, I want you to put on the chart, if you will please, chart number 9GG. Here we have the drawing of the pelvic skeletal section with the thigh bones and knees and part of the lower bones of the leg. And on the left side, as you look at it, here's the person in the drawing, his right side. You will see a bone which I've numbered number 1. This is the natural thigh bone, and in this thigh bone is bone marrow. Now, the bone marrow plays a very crucial role in the manufacture of cells for the blood, without which we cannot live very long. Now, on the right side is a synthetic bone. Certainly, Certainly medical scientists and neurosurgeons have been able to develop marvelous things along this line. Here's a man perhaps whose thigh bone has degenerated to the point that it had to be replaced. And so thigh bone number 2 is made of synthetic material. Now I'm going to leave this here for Dr. Flew, and I want him, as he looks at it, to identify it as to whether the thigh bone 2 was created by design or was designed by some intelligent person, and whether thigh bone number 1 was designed by some intelligent person. Now, of course, what he'll have to say to stay, even to try to stay in this debate, is that thigh bone number 1, the real one, the one with bone marrow in it, the one that the other one is designed from, that's copied from, the one upon which your life depends, he has to say that was by mere chance, starting off with nothing but rocks and dirt. The God of this that made this is rocks and dirt. He could not for a moment admit, he can't even contemplate the idea that the great God of the universe designed and planned it, but he wouldn't admit for a moment that that other thigh bone was not designed by some intelligent human being. I want now to look at chart number 9HH. Chart number 9HH. Now you see we have two skeletons. On the left we have a natural human skeleton. That is, someone who is dead and all the flesh and so forth is off of his bones. On the other side there is a synthetic human skeleton, one that is made of synthetic material. Now, Dr. Flew, I'm going to leave this up here for you to mark or to tell us about. I want you to tell us whether the natural human skeleton was a result of design or the result of chance, and whether the synthetic human skeleton was a result of design or the result of chance. Now, friends, to be an atheist, to be a materialist of the sort of which Dr. Flew is, he will have to say that the human skeleton, just by sheer accident, no planning, no purpose, no intelligence, came into being. Even though they could not have been born or transformed from an ape. He still hasn't told us how it's supposed to have gotten here. But on the other hand, he would insist as strongly as anybody that the skeleton made out of synthetic material was designed by somebody. Now, friends, the human skeleton represents a masterpiece. I'm reading here a statement from a scientist. Now, listen to this. The human skeleton represents a masterpiece of engineering design, with each component part tailored to a specific job. The brain is protected by the skull. The spinal cord, a highly sensitive and vital nerve center, is protected by vertebrae. The spine even has its own built-in shock absorbers, the discs of cushioning cartilage between segments. The leg bones are hollow, in keeping with the engineering principle that a hollow column is stronger than a solid one of equal weight. On a weight-for-weight basis, bones are stronger than steel. Bone construction is comparable to reinforced concrete. That's from our Human Body, Reader's Digest, number 1962. And in B.F. Miller, medical doctor, Man in His Body, the Human Skeleton is a remarkable piece of functional architecture. Now, you don't have architecture without somebody being an architect, and that means an intelligent being. Now, I'll leave one more thing up here, what atheists must know. They must know that the human male reproductive system, with all of its complexity, I started to draw a picture of it, though there'd be nothing wrong with it. I thought perhaps maybe some of you might be offended by it, and the details of the female human reproductive system. It's terrible complexity. That is the greatness of it. And to imagine that this happened by sheer accident is simply incredible to anyone who's thinking rationally about this entire matter. I leave this also with Dr. Flew to try to tell us if that came by accident or by design. I leave this with him to tell us whether the human cardiovascular system, the human respiratory system, the human digestive system, the human eliminative system comes from its creator, which is rocks and dirt, rather than from the eternal God. Chart number 42A8, look at two hands. Here's a man has one natural hand, one mechanical hand. Which one is designed? Are they both designed? Or are they both by the accident? Oh, no, says Dr. Flew. The mechanical hand, the one made out of metal and wire and so forth, is designed. There had to be intelligence behind it. All right, thank you. I'll leave that one too.
I wish I was a professional biologist, because if the monkey trial is to be conducted all over again, it does seem that you need someone here who's not a philosopher, but someone who has at his fingertips a description of some particular discovered mechanisms. I know there are plenty of these, I've read them, but I'm not able to give offhand some description of something that looked as if, or would have looked to Dr. Warren as if it must have been designed, but where the detailed mechanism of the way in which it presumably emerged without design has been discovered. I'm sorry about that. I'm just, I fear, going to fail you on that point. There's got to be something else for this monkey trial. Now, about the sorts of things that I can say something useful and relevant about. Point one, I've made it before, but perhaps if I make it in another way, it will get across. I want to say, apropos of all this stuff about evolution, I want to say to Dr. Warren, in the words of the title of a best-selling student Christian movement press book in my own country, your God is too small. And the point behind that is that the most that any sort of argument of this sort is going to prove is a powerful, intelligent being capable of the considerable achievement of designing consciously from scratch a human organism to work on the basis of the materials available in this universe. But this isn't the beginnings of the infinite, the unspeakable, the eternal, the creature of all being and power and justice. Your God is too small. It's just not the right thing. It's not beginning to get to the point. And of course, expressed as I've just expressed it with some vehemence, is the point which has often been expressed less vehemently about any argument to design. And the thing about design, where design occurs, is that it's an application of an intelligence within certain limitations. You know, what's clever about the design, you know, is you made a revolving crane out of matchsticks. Oh, you clever thing to make a crane out of these materials. But a being that's all-powerful and omniscient just says, let there be. It doesn't show skill in design. Your God is too small. Well, now, point of the sort of point I can make about evolution is that the, other than the one I've just made, is that the record of the rocks, one of the things I do know about, because it was one of the first things that led Darwin to think along the lines on which he did think, is a record of the, if you like, higher, more complicated, more sophisticated, more integrated organisms appearing at later stages in the record. Now, if we're going to have a special creationist account of this, what this progressive development suggests is not the infinite, the unspeakable, the eternal, the omniscient. It suggests a very powerful being that took the hell of a lot of time to get good at it, that made a few simple ones at first, and then, a million or so years later, had another go. He could do a bit better than the amoeba now, and he got a multicellular but still simple organism. And after some millions and millions of years of geological development, he created, you know, the first man and so on. Oh, it won't do, it won't do. Yeah. About the reproductive system. I'm a bit surprised to find Dr. Warren talking about the human reproductive system. I know it's all a bit fashionable in the presidential debates and all that, but after all, the human reproductive system is not the right thing to refer to if you want to say men, so to speak, couldn't appear without special creation. It's to refer to the way in which we all know that human beings do appear. If there's special creation involved, it was a long time ago. But, immediately human beings appear in a way that's all too familiar and which we describe as the facts of life. Now these questions that I've got before me, as they say. The ultimate source of this hand was dead matter. Well, yes, certainly. I do believe that living organisms evolved over an immeasurably long period of time from non-living, but it's not strictly right to describe these as dead. This is, I think, a very misleading thing. It's living from non-living, not living from dead, because after all, to say that something's dead implies that it must have been alive beforehand. And with all these things, yes, of course, I can distinguish between, and of course I allow the distinction between something that growed and something that is a human artifact. And how do I make this distinction? Because I know that the artifacts were designed. One can see, one sees them being designed and so on, but equally well, I don't see human beings being designed. I've watched some grow like other parents. And of course, one may argue that somewhere ultimately along the line there was some conscious design in it. But if we're just going to look at the contrast between artifacts now and non-artifacts now, what I've said is surely the right thing to say. Well, enough about evolution, I think. We've had a lot about arguments to design and, of course, quite a lot about an argument from the objectivity of value. One thing which has not been mentioned so far is religious experience. I think it needs to be. For people often do claim that they've enjoyed abundant assurance in their own lives, that they know that there's a God because they've enjoyed direct commune with this God, that they've had, as many would say, experience of God. Now, one way to go on from here, when one had made a claim like this, would be to say that you had been present at the great spectacle in North Texas, which Dr. Warren imagined and described to us, was it last night? That you'd actually been there watching it all happen, whereas I perhaps had seen only a replay of the TV newscasts. Now, that would be one way to go on, but it is, for pretty obvious reasons, not the way taken by those to whom I'm now referring. The other way, which is the interesting one, which I want to consider, the other way to go on is to urge that, whereas perhaps we who've not enjoyed the revelatory experiences vouchsafed to the believer cannot reasonably be required to accept his claims, he is in a sure position to know, and we can only deny his reports about his experience of God by calling him a liar. And this, of course, we are unwilling to do. Not solely or even mainly because such charges are embarrassing for all concerned, but for the much better reason that we know the claimant to be a perfectly honest man. So what do we say to such claims to have enjoyed privately an irrefragable revelation of one particular God? Well, one thing we might, and perhaps should say, is that such claims would be more impressive if they referred to deities not worshipped in the circles in which the claimants actually move. It is, I think, a rather noteworthy fact that visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary seem to occur in Lourdes, in a strongly Catholic area of France, rather than in, I'm sorry, I can't give you a local example, say in some of the hillier parts of Tennessee. Whereas visions of Shiva the Destroyer occurred until recently only in places like Benares or Mysore, and not that is, till the wave of Indian immigration after World War II in Birmingham or Manchester. In ancient China, people tended to have visions of dragons. In Japan, of demons, and of course in your own country in these days of flying saucers and little green men from Venus. Well, that's a good first point and is one that should be made. But the crucial one is different and a philosophical point. We need to distinguish two fundamentally different senses of the word experience and of such phrases as a vision of. In one sense, let's call it experience private, the claim to have had experience refers only to something essentially private. It's like claiming, well, it seemed to me like this, or I had experienced a patch of colour, but I'm not saying there was anything out there. Now, in this private sense of experience, as you might say, you are indeed, or the person who has it, does have a special authority. If that's all you're claiming, you are, after all, in the best position to know. But, of course, the fact that you've had this sort of experience in which it seemed very vivid to you, but it was an altogether private thing, this sort of thing has no significance except insofar as you have reason to believe that this private experience was caused by some corresponding being. In the other sense of experience, which is in fact the everyday, ordinary sense of experience, a claim to have had experience of something is not just a claim about how it seemed to you in the privacy of your own head, but I'm not saying anything about anything else. It's a claim about the contacts you've had, the knowledge you've acquired of the universe around us. It's in that second public sense of experience that people advertise that they want to hire some people with experience of computer programming. But now, in this second sense of experience, your honest claim is not the last word. You may be mistaken in what you claim to have seen, what you claim, okay, you can't be mistaken, or you've got a special authority about how it looked to you, what you were rather inclined to think it was, but you haven't got this special authority about what was there. Consider, for instance, an example which has been very famous and very important, about which a distinguished novel was written, as The Song of Bernadette, and about which a movie, which probably your grandparents saw when I saw it, has been made. This is the case which led to the establishment of the cult of the Blessed Virgin at Lourdes. Now, no one was in any doubt at all that the young peasant girl, Bernadette Soubirous, who had a vision, was quite honestly telling everyone how it seemed to them, that as it were, it had been like a dream in which she dreamt of seeing and talking to the Blessed Virgin, who in her dream looked quite remarkably like one of those representations from the neighborhood religious objects store that she will have seen in her local church. What, of course, was in dispute, and what the machinery of the Roman Catholic Church was deployed to try to find out, was whether this private experience, in the first sense, about which her honest testimony was the last word, had actually in some way been caused by the surviving spirit, personality, whatever you say, of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, why am I doing all this? I'm doing all this because I think something ought to be said about this sort of appeal to religious experience, which is extremely common in Protestant circles in my own country, though maybe it's not a thing in the Church of Christ here. This distinction between two senses of the word experience is absolutely crucial for considering this sort of claim. What won't do, but what is all too often done, is to try to move from a claim about experience in the private, limited sense, the claim about which you do have a special authority. After all, it's your dream, your vision, or whatever. You wouldn't expect anyone else to have or see your dream, your vision, your hallucination, or whatnot. The temptation is, the temptation to which people all too often succumb, to move from a claim about their experience in the private sense, a claim about which they do have a special authority, to a conclusion maintaining that you've had experience of something independent of yourself, that you've had experience in the public sense. Now, maybe you have, but this further and bolder claim, the one that refers to the causes out there or to something other than your private experience, this further and bolder claim is not one which other people, or for that matter you yourself, can or should accept on your say-so alone. Not even you, however vivid it was, are justified in saying, oh, well, I've actually had an experience that was caused by something out there. I've been in contact with the Blessed Virgin, or whatever it may be. You're not entitled to do this in defiance of other evidence as to what was going on out there, or without any inquiry about what independent evidence of what was going on out there showed. Of course it may be terribly vivid, so may a hallucination be. Of course you're very much inclined to say that you have had not merely experience of God in the sense in which someone having a dream of the Blessed Virgin would have had an experience of the Blessed Virgin, but experience of God in the sense in which someone who truly is said to have had experience of, type 6 computers would have had experience of type 6 computers if they had actually had dealings with these computers. Well, that's something which I think's worth presenting here because nothing's been said about experience before. And also, in part, that I just do not know what to say about all this about evolution, other than what I've already said, that at best or at worst, no disproof of evolutionary theory would begin to establish the desired conclusion about an omnipotent God or all that. I mean, it would be dreadfully embarrassing. I should be worried sick. I wouldn't, know what to think next, but it wouldn't do what it's supposed to do. What else can we usefully say? Well, I suppose yet once again, if there do seem to be some minutes left, yet once again I ought to try to bring out this point about human beings and persons and babies. I mean, the fundamental trouble about this is that Dr. Warren wants to employ, and this is entirely reasonable, granting Dr. Warren's beliefs about how the world is. Dr. Warren wants to employ a notion of a human being, and of course notions referring to all other species, which are quite inconsistent with evolutionary theory. That's to say, all his notions referring to species are by him interpreted in such a way that there just are absolutely sharp lines between species with no development from one to the other. Well, that may be right or it may be wrong, but what can't be right is to produce an argument which is supposed to contain both an account of evolutionary theory and these species terms used in an anti-evolutionary way, and then conclude triumphantly that there's an inconsistency in this. Of course there's an inconsistency between the denial of evolutionary theory and the assertion of it, but that isn't an inconsistency in evolutionary theory.